All right, so we are here in Crestone, Colorado, in the San Luis Valley, and we've come here today to talk about, I guess, three primary things. One is corporate environmentalism and the faux green movement that goes back to the early era of technocracy and the Trilateral Commission in the 1970s. We're here to talk about faith and the co-optation of faith communities into impact investing spaces. And we're here to talk a little bit also about consciousness and engineered consciousness through intentional sort of co-optation of meditation and other elements of spiritual practice into this sort of cybernetic program. And so all of these things have connections to a gentleman. His name, it looks like it's spelled Maurice Strong, but I think they said you pronounce it Maurice Strong, and his wife, Hanne Strong. Maurice Strong made his fortune in the 1960s in oil and gas in Canada, in Alberta, in the Alberta area, and became a very, very wealthy individual, and then went on to have connections to the United Nations Environmental Program. And it's interesting because in the late 1970s, he acquired, along with this Arizona, Colorado land and cattle company, like 2 million acres in this part of the world, in Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico area. And it was connected to a parcel of land called and I'm not sure if it's Baca or Baca land grant, B-A-C-A, the Luis Maria Baca Ranch, millions and millions of acres. We are here essentially in a mountain valley. This is cattle country. As we were driving in, we saw lots of cattle, in the horizon. Great mountains behind us. This is the land of the Ute and the Comanche. Originally, it's their original lands. Just to the south of us is the Sand Dunes National Park. So these great dunes of silicon sand up that way. And then beneath us here are immense reservoirs of water in what's called the confined aquifer. I think there's actually two aquifers, and a top level aquifer and then a deeper aquifer with unimaginable amounts of water that many people have desired to tap into for the development along the Front Range of Colorado and Denver and these smart cities that are developing. And so Maurice Strong saw this as a very strategic purchase of this land, not just for cattle, but he came in and he subdivided many units of this valley for real estate development. It was like 10 or 15,000 units. And at the time, we're pretty far out. We're maybe 4 hours outside of Denver, where it's pretty remote to get here. The overall area now is pretty economically disenfranchised. Even the homes that ended up being built on this land, they're fairly modest homes. These are not these deluxe, ginormous log cabin, Colorado cabins, modest homes. And the real estate development never really took off. And then eventually they sort of cut off that bit of it and spun it out into its own organization. And it was developed essentially by Maurice Strong's wife, Hanne, as an intentional community for interfaith organizations. And so there are about at least 19 representatives of different faiths who have, in spiritual practice, they've offered up space to come here and establish a presence on this land, which is considered to be highly energetic, sort of similar to Sedona, Arizona in that respect. And clearly we're resonant on all of this water with these amazing mountains and the silicon sand and the wind, and it's a very energetic space. So Hanne Strong, I believe she was originally Danish, she moved with her family down here and they set up this religious experiment, I guess, for people to pray in this space and to welcome people who are seeking refuge and retreat, and to teach this. A lot of the institutions are connected to Buddhism as well and meditative practice. So the interesting thing about Maurice Strong, as I mentioned earlier, he was a key figure in working with the United Nations. In fact, he was a director of their environmental program to arrange early environmentalist gatherings. In 1972 in Stockholm, and then he played a key role in 1992 with the Rio Summit that set in place the Millennium Development Goals and eventually the Sustainable Development Goals and what's broadly known as Agenda 21. And you know, he's an oil guy, now he's an environmentalist, right? And you might think, oh, well, maybe he just felt really bad about how he got all of his money, so he's going to put his intentions to a good place. But essentially in the 1980s and then later in the 1990s, they went after the water under the sacred land. So, you know, it's interesting when you have a global environmentalist movement that is run by oil interests and that is looking at extractivism of water, which is one of the most precious natural resources that we have. You know, it's not really about authentically healing the planet and making things better for the planet and the people. It's new ways of creating business opportunities. And so many people have actually done extensive research into Maurice Strong and Hanne Strong. Far greater than my level of expertise. But I just want to offer a frame that most of the analyses around Maurice and Hanne are framed as leftist, left-leaning. In fact, Maurice Strong ended up towards the end of his life, he was enmeshed in this food for oil situation with the UN and eventually left and resettled in Beijing. Of course, there's a lot of stuff going on in Beijing with AI development and artificial brains and ed tech and global capital in Beijing. So you can relocate to Beijing without necessarily being affiliated with, communist principles or socialist principles. And so most of the people who've done this research around Agenda 21 are setting it within a frame of the communists or the socialists or the leftists are coming to take away our rights and freedoms here in the United States. And if you follow my work, you know my frame is somewhat different, because once you understand that the new game of holographic video game life is running on hijacking the good intentions of most people to take care of the vulnerable communities, to take care of the planet, to have a religious practice, that is all being hijacked into global capital. And that is through the ESG, environmental social governance investing, through social impact investing, and the idea that you will put the entire world, all of the living beings, with smart dust and frequencies from the satellites and orbiting in space, geolocating so we can fix and solve poverty and environmental pollution and climate change. And that's just not the case. I mean, it's not the case that any of that is about helping. It's about channeling global capital. And that's why the Impact Management Project, I really encourage people to look into that, is 2,000 of the world's largest asset holders. Up there at the top, you've got the BlackRocks of the world, you've got the Deutsche Banks, Goldman Sachs. Those are the people who need to digitize this majesty and say, we're going to fix the planet, we're going to solve poverty, we're going to have peace. But we will only have all of these wonderful things if we can get everyone on blockchain, no one is left behind, and that we can channel your energetic life force into our cybernetic systems, and we will just dial it up. And we'll make some money too, and we'll have our system of control mechanism in here. And I do believe very strongly, so Maurice Strong he passed away, I think, in 2015, but this legacy that is put in place continues on, of the United Nations, of the dashboard data analytics, and then a lot of those fixing things will be laid at the feet of the faith institutions, of churches, of mosques, of synagogues, of temples, and they will say, well, we need you to help the poor, but in order to do that, we expect you to track the impact. And we want to use that impact data, by the way, to try to trigger the singularity and bring about generalized artificial intelligence, and to create something that will supersede natural life. And so I'm coming today in part to tell a story that many have told in great detail before about Strong's many, many connections to the Rockefellers. It turns out Hanne Strong, she set up something called the Manitou Foundation, and her partner in that effort was Lawrence Rockefeller. Okay, and Lawrence Rockefeller of the Rockefeller family, and he was a trustee of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund set up in the 1940s. And the Rockefeller Brothers Fund is involved in impact investing. It's involved in impact investing in the media. It's part of the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance, and it's part of the Mission Exchange Forum. So it's very clear the Rockefeller connection to the social impact finance space. Now, Lawrence Rockefeller collaborated with Hanne Strong in 1994 to set up this Manitou Foundation. Foundation to create an interfaith presence. And again, it's hijacking all these things. I'm sure most people here who come to practice their spiritual practice do it with the right intentions, and yet it's being set within a framework of global capital. It's being set into a framework of engineered consciousness, scientific management of spiritual engagement, to put it on a dashboard. That is where this is going. Now, Lawrence Rockefeller, in addition to supporting this foundation, his other enterprises included restoring colonial Williamsburg. And that was a central part of like the narrative arc of colonization, domination, civilization. So on the same time he's creating interfaith within this natural environment, he's also exerting the domination principle through the impact investing space. The Manitou Foundation, actually it was created in 1988. They were also involved with a person named Thomas Banyacha, who was a Hopi elder in Arizona. And so they pulled in the Hopi prophecy to essentially underpin this idea that, you know, the end is coming, right? There's some big thing that is on the horizon. And many of the indigenous communities worldwide have, because their rights have been stomped on by the governments that have taken over their original lands, they've appealed to the United Nations, right? They appeal to the body that, if you don't know any better, you think it's there to manage fair play, to keep world peace, to make things right. But no, it's set up by the Rockefellers essentially to mirror the world into this metaverse reality under the guise of peace and love and environmentalism. And so I want all those things. I'm not here to say that I'm against healing the earth, being respectful, living within our means, addressing global supply chains and slave labor, and the harm that has come to all of these things, and the degradation of spiritual practice. Those are all really vital things, but it cannot be done within the established framework of billionaire oil extractivists and water extractivists and people who would masquerade their intentions, use this to just as a cover for a much more low frequency intent. I think it's all entangled together, and we need to work to untangle it somewhat. So I think that's probably, I wanted to mention too, Maurice Strong, in addition to his, extractivism connections, United Nations connections, he was also part of the World Alliance of YMCAs. That's the Young Men's Christian Alliance, also in other countries like in Africa. And we know that from what's coming with social impact finance, the YMCA is very connected with the Boys and Girls Club and the Chambers of Commerce and the United Ways in terms of essentially pulling children out of their families and sort of bringing them up as the new harmonized digital citizens. And so that, I think his connection to the YMCAs is important. And again, he was part of something called the University for Peace. He was head of the University for Peace. And that was set up by the United Nations in 1980. And it was set up in Costa Rica. Now, Costa Rica is important in this equation because Cristina Figueres, who is the lead on all of the environmentalism through the UN on carbon credit trading, her father, Jose Figueres Ferrer, was her father, and he was president of Costa Rica like 3 different times during the late 40s up through the early 1970s. And so Costa Rica is being uplifted as an ecotourism, as right relationship. Lawrence Rockefeller, too, was all about resorts and ecotourism. So there's this way of using capital to essentially say that you're uplifting the environment, but meanwhile, it's still setting aside nature as a playground for the rich and then denying their access to the resources to the people whose original lands these were, and to the poor, and to, and again, we're in this space here in this community that is greatly impoverished and suffering from a lot of addiction and economic dispossession. I think that the Baca this Baca land grant is very interesting. The Baca land grant. Again, it was made by the U.S. government to the heirs of the Vegas Grandes grant in 1860, and this section was one of the first large areas of the West to be fenced. So again, we're getting back to, what is property? What is For the collective good, what is the function of properties and enclosures now is we're having geofencing. We don't actually need physical fences anymore. We can just have electronic fences. And, you know, yeah, I think that's mostly, I think that closes it out for Maurice Strong.